Matt Lewis, welcome to the Insight Jam.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Well, make the case for organizations creating the role of Chief AI Officer.
Sure. So at this point in time, maybe 10% of organizations have been using and adopted generative artificial intelligence. Fast forward 5 years, all organizations that intend to still be relevant will have done so. If an organization intends to be valuable 5 years from now, they need someone to lead that strategy forward. Whether you call that person a chief AI officer, you call them a head of AI, or just a throat to choke, you need someone in that role. The federal government calls them chief AI officer. Many enterprises call them something like what my title is. But you need someone to kind of architect the future. It is a strategic function. It is a futurist function, but it is also a function responsible for things like product design, upskilling, partnerships, technology, and a number of other responsibilities that all kind of get squished together, as it were. Before I was in this role, I was chief data and analytics officer and did that for about 6 years. We built, artificial intelligence models. We did business intelligence. We did a lot of things that help the existing business solve real problems. But there is some overlap between those two roles, the CDAO role and the CAIO role. But the main difference really is that the chief artificial intelligence officer role helps kind of architect the future, and the chief data analytics officer role is really kind of solving problems of the present. And there is some, consideration that one can progress the other, but it isn't like a foregone conclusion that just because someone's done the first, they can do the second.
So what would a chief AI officer be working on right now if they're getting after it? I mean, what do organizations really need to be thinking about first with regard to this level of AI, which I consider kind of early stage?
Yeah, I mean, if someone has just joined an organization as chief AI officer, it's likely that they'll be joining an organization that is relatively mature with regards to AI adoption and consideration. When I say mature, I mean they've probably gone through an exercise with their senior leadership and their board and perhaps an external consultancy that has helped them identify exactly what types of challenges are possible to kind of reinvent, as it were, with artificial intelligence, and from what's possible, what they practically should actually do within that firm to, help them address stakeholder needs, customer needs, colleague needs, et cetera, and what they have the resources to do in the time that still remains. So when they come into an organization like that, chances are they have a throttled list of, X number of use cases that are worth pursuing, maybe even a number of them that are already in consideration or at different stages of development. And that person in that role will have to try to figure out which ones are worth, titrating up, which ones are worth deprecating, killing altogether, which ones, are, identifying champions within the business that perhaps can be moved into other roles that are, beneficial to the organization, and all the above, as well as externally, what types of partners like the big tech firms like, OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google are the right firms for them, as well as in the startup ecosystem, where there are organizations that are really, pushing the innovation ball up the hill that are, worth, kind of considering as things mature.
So this is a revolution that I liken to a couple of past ones that I've been through, being on the older side. The first one was the PC revolution, which I went through when I was young. The second one was obviously the internet revolution. And now this one feels like it's even bigger than both of those, and both of those were remarkably significant. But I do remember the internet revolution very specifically, where you had organizations who were emerging out of the revolution, digital organizations that now have subsequently become some of the largest organizations in the world. You had other legacy organizations who just couldn't see the threat or the opportunity, and they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it was also a product of trying to change course with a large organization on something that was effectively emerging and coalescing on the fly. And it just isn't what a large organization is comfortable doing, is kind of building on shifting sands, if you will. And that's where this feels. It's moving so quickly that I think a lot of large companies are paralyzed as to what to do, because there's so many landmines and traps that they can potentially fall into right now. with regard to their data being released into large language models that they may not necessarily want to have happen. What would be your advice with regard to an organization that may not know quite what to do at the moment?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, they're one of the people that I follow a lot in this space is Peter Diamandis, who's chairman of the X Prize and, has, built Singularity University. He has this quote. He says that by the end of this decade of the 2020s, there really only are two types of companies. There are companies that fully embrace the generative artificial intelligence revolution and have transformed their entire enterprise as such, and all the other companies that have gone out of business that have died. Right. Essentially. That's really
former companies. Right.
Really. And it might sound extreme, but I really think he's right, because it is that momentous of a catalyst within the business. And if an organization doesn't adopt generative now, and they should have been adopting it for the last 18 to 24 months truly, then there are going to be, and there already are, a number of organizations in the entrepreneurial startup ecosystem that will eat their lunch and will build companies without the same types of barriers to entry that they had over the last 20 to 30 years, that in 3, 4, 5, 7 years will put them out of business. So it really is a very simple choice. It's an innovate or die choice. And, every organization has to make that choice for them and for their colleagues and for their shareholders. Do they want to transform their enterprise with generative AI across the entire stack, back office, front office, customer facing, or are they choosing essentially to exit the business within 5 to 7 years?
Well, so do you wait so in my mind, again, having lived through the internet revolution and subsequently, I guess, the cloud in terms of enterprise technology, the cloud revolution where software as a service kind of came along and revolutionized enterprise tech. Do you wait at this point for the salespeople to arrive in the next year who are now, being hired at these AI startups that are going to bring all this amazing, fully baked AI tool sets to the party, or more to the point, maybe your larger implementations like your ERPs and your data and analytics and your cybersecurity to kind of bring their AI toolkit to your existing implementations? Do you wait, or do you start to try to build things ahead of that wave? Because it strikes me that in the next 18 to 24 months, you will have a never-ending visitor log of salespeople pitching the latest AI tool set that'll save, massive money in the marketing department, the analytics department, and cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I spoke about this at a conference recently that, even in, the kind of darker days of AI, I've been in AI for 15 years now. The first 12 years were kind of boring, honestly, because there wasn't a lot of activity. And when you talked about AI in the big business kind of environment, most people kind of shrug their shoulders and kind of walk you out of the room, but they weren't really that interested in it until ChatGPT kind of came out. And now it's the antithesis of that. But you're right. I mean, there are a ton of companies that are emerging now that all claim to have really interesting and life-changing offerings. So it's hard to know kind of who to partner with and where you should really focus. But that being said, I think, this is one of those spaces where, unlike the AI of old, like when I first started 15 years ago, that you don't need teams of, doctoral degrees with machine learning backgrounds to really understand what matters to you as a person or to you as a professional. You can really get a lot of understanding and experience by just working in a generative AI platform like a ChatGPT or Gemini from Google or another environment, or one of the applications that exist, hundreds of applications that exist off the shelf for free, and solving real problems in your professional life, your personal life, seeing kind of what works and what doesn't for you. And I think everyone should do that, really. Everyone should be doing it now in their actual time, their life, their free time, their professional time, just so that when those salespeople show up and they knock on the door, you kind of get a sense of where the boundaries are, what to expect from the models, the platforms that they're selling. You'll know kind of what good looks like and where the floor is. You can't kind of fall down beneath, if you will. And it's hard to do that if you don't really know what the models are capable of. And the only way to do that is by experimenting a lot. And anyone I know that's in the space is playing with models, playing with platforms on a regular basis, a consistent basis. And I think one of the things we did early was to encourage experimentation, not to kind of ban ChatGPT, as many firms have done, and still some are still doing today, which I think is ludicrous. But you to really encourage people to say, oh, you have a problem, like, for example, you want to hire someone new in your team. Instead of writing a job description from scratch, which might take literally half a week to do, 20 hours between like writing it a little bit, then getting up and going to the water cooler and getting some coffee, and then writing a little bit more, blah, 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 blah. Write in ChatGPT, see how far you get, and then get the final product out to your boss for a review, and then send it out. Be done with it. The whole thing takes 30 minutes. And do that across everything that you normally do historically over the last 25 years, and see how much more work you can get done in less time. And when people start living their life that way, everything changes.
I'd like to take this conversation from the highest level, the C-suite, and then move it down to that kind of frontline information worker level, because I think it has very different implications along the way. At the highest level, how should they be counseling, or how should they approach creating a strategy? I'm assuming that's what most people are doing. And I also believe that this is going to be a consultancy bonanza, by the way, this moment in time. I think the consultants are going to make more money than perhaps some of the AI companies initially, because I think there is a genuine, it's almost like playing with fire at this point. I think there's a genuine fear that if I try to take this on by myself without the protective layer of, name your preferred consultancy, I might look like an idiot. So I'm going to bring in, again, pick your poison in terms of the large consultancies to help me sort this out. And I think that's a lot of the reasons why people are saying, all right, we're just going to freeze and kind of put it on hold for the organization downstream while we sort out what the hell we really want to do. What is that? I mean, what should they be thinking about? What should be the kind of general strategic direction for the C-suite at this point?
Yeah, it is a great question. I mean, there's no easy answer to this question, because unlike a lot of other general purpose technologies that have entered the common discourse, that people are aware of, like, for example, like electricity, for example, or fire, the steam, right?
It's funny you say that, because I mean, that is where we are. This is the industrial revolution. This is
it really is, and I'm not overstating it. It really actually is that powerful. And when people look back 10, 20 years from now, they'll realize that November 22 is an inflection point in humanity's history. But regardless, like, when you look at those general purpose technologies,
I completely agree.
This isn't my opinion. There are lots of people that already have stated this as fact. Lots of very senior people, like the World Economic Forum and the UN and the rest. But regardless, when you look at the other general purpose technologies, like the steam engine, for example, there are only a few ways you can use the steam engine, right? Like you could, if you're going to use it for its intended purpose, to convert, the atmosphere's, kind of latent energy into real energy. That's all it really does. But you could, I guess, use it as a footstool, or you could use it as a paperweight, but like it really only has one intended purpose. It's not like that with generative artificial intelligence. With generative artificial intelligence, in an enterprise, in a big business, you have to either, as a C-suite or a board, know where you're headed as a firm, and also, most importantly, where your weaknesses are and what you don't want to kind of progress forward on as an entity, or as a leader within the business, as a senior executive, like a chief artificial intelligence officer or a chief transformation officer or chief digital officer, have to know what the firm is truly exceptional at and what you really suck at, honestly, in order to really use generative artificial intelligence well. Even if you're a BCG or a McKinsey or an Accenture or PwC or EY, whatever you are, you come in, if you don't have a counterpart in the business that knows those things well, you can't really leverage Gen AI in a way that works, because in order for Gen AI to work well, you have to have a really deep reservoir of subject matter expertise. And that subject matter expertise typically is within a functional line of business that the organization has matured over a long period of time, usually decades, sometimes longer, but also within the people that are actually supporting that area, the human factor, the human components that support that area. And what Gen AI then does is either amplify or augment the human capability and the resonant subject matter expertise of that area so that it makes the organization a better version of itself. So if you're an organization that has just gone through a massive restructure and you've just laid off 10% of your workforce over the last 2 years, how you use generative AI over the next 3 to 5 years will be drastically different than an organization that has just acquired 3 other firms and are integrating them for growth. They have very different business needs at this point in time, and how they use Gen AI will be completely different from each other just because of their corporate goals and the fact that they're maybe in different lines of business, or they have different markets or different customers. And it's in that way, like Gen AI is kind of more like a mirror, if you will, than like a single kind of purpose technology like the steam engine. But because of that, it is so powerful. And it's like almost like saying, like, if you don't pick up the mirror and use it, then you're only hurting yourself, because everyone else is going to use the mirror to help themselves. And if you don't pick it up and wait, if you will, even a month or 3 months or a year, you're a long, long way behind other organizations. I've said to my team that in generative AI, a week is like a quarter, because things move so fast. And if you wait a month in generative, it's like waiting a year, honestly.
Yeah, no, this point that you're making at the end goes hand in hand with your point around the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. This scales immediately and infinitely versus waiting for another steam engine to be built and then the money to purchase the steam engine to then implement it into whatever you're going to get for a benefit. The Industrial Revolution took decades and generations because it was analog. It wasn't digital. And that's the most important point, is the speed factor at this point. And in fairness, I think because it is so infinitely scalable, you can catch up. If you get your act together, you can fall behind very quickly, but you can catch up very quickly because, again, it scales infinitely, almost, immediately.
Yeah, it's a different calculus now than it was with previous technological innovations, where in historical innovations, it was always the larger enterprises that had the advantage, and that, if you built early, you always had the lead. But it's not necessarily the case now. You should have the advantage in those environments, but if you are scrappy and if you build late with a seasoned team, you could still catch up, or maybe even leapfrog existing organizations because of access to data, access to the cloud, access to expertise. And you can do things that a team of 10, that a team of 1,000 could never do, just if you have agility.
Yeah, I want to talk about leapfrogging for a minute. One of my other talking points is that the titans of this revolution are still in high school. We don't even know who they are yet. The Bezoses, the Zuckerbergs. In the previous revolution, it was Jobs and Gates. Then there was, Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg. This generation's titans haven't graduated from high school yet, but they're getting access to this sort of thing. It's ridiculous how much access they're having to this technology, and their eyes are popping. And I mean, where do you see, some pretty significant legacy companies now? I mean, I saw one post that you had where you kind of casually said, search is effectively dead. If they don't know it, they don't, that search is going to be effectively dead going forward. And I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm first of all, I think I'm really excited by the kind of crop of entrepreneurial minded folks that are kind of coming into this environment at this point. I know a fair number of these people, both because I've worked with them within the startups that we partner with, in my day job, but also I advise a number of startup CEOs on the side. And then, I've been mentoring a number of people also that are kind of on their journey. And I think, there are some people, like you said, that are, kind of in high school, kind of half joking, some that are in early college. And then there are also a number of people that are, in existing businesses that, kind of recognize that the traditional path of kind of progressing on a career ladder may not be for them. And that, becoming entrepreneurial now because of what generative artificial intelligence offers is possible now, maybe even something that they can see for themselves and that maybe in 2006, they would have walked the corporate ladder until they retired. But because of what generative AI affords them, in 2027, they'll be the CEO of a startup that actually does threaten an existing entity. And I know a number of those people as well, and I think that's really exciting. I think one of the things that's really interesting about this space, about the kind of entrepreneurial space within artificial intelligence, is kind of the democratization of kind of technological solutions. It's not even so much the technology itself, but the fact that it makes possible solving real problems that people have had for a long time that historically were the kind of province of existing enterprises. For example, I trying to kind of think about how do we educate lots of people so that they are prepared for the job market, which historically has been the province of universities, if you will, or how do we ensure that people that are struggling with their mental health are able to live lives where they feel supported, safe, secure, and enjoy their daily existence. So it's just been the province of hospitals and pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, et cetera. These are problems that a lot of people trying to solve for these issues using generative AI are starting from kind of like a beginner's mind, as it were, and thinking, like in an AI native environment where generative AI is freely accessible, democratized, and the world might look a little bit different than it looked historically. What could we do, de novo? What would an AI native, digital friendly space look like that has never come before? And I've seen a number of these type of entries over the last year plus that are remarkable, truly exciting, that are very early stage. But I think if any of them mature to the point of commercialization over the next couple of years, any one of them could really be kind of life-changing for the recipient. So I think there's so much promise in the space of trying to really solve real problems that people have, really applying AI to kind of these thorny kind of challenges that still plague us as people.
Yeah, let's talk about the implications here, and let's talk about the upside, because it's easy to talk about the downside, but there's so much promise. And when you're able to, once you realize the power of neural networks and large language models combined, it's obvious that if you just port the world's data into, which I think effectively is what's happened. And it strikes me, I saw something the other day that said, they're going to run out of data eventually in short order. It's like, I don't think that's the problem. I don't think that's going to be the problem. I think there's plenty of data for the time being. But when you have this traditional university system, which some would argue, currently paying tuition for a freshman in Boston College, that is completely broken, and you have, the medical industry, which one could argue is in terms of billing and cost might be broken, but all that data exists and can be ported into large language models and neural networks that could effectively revolutionize both of those in ways that completely not only strip out costs, but change the entire game with regard to how learning is served or how medical research is conducted.
Yeah, I think, one of the kind of biggest kind of ahas that I had was probably like about a year and a half ago, right after I moved this role, was I was chatting with a couple of physician friends of mine and the person who runs the epidemiology program at Duke about kind of what would happen like at a time when most clinicians, most patients, most people in the US had adopted generative AI. What would the world look like? And everyone was really focused on like, okay, what are the use cases? How do I use ChatGPT for this, for that? Like, that's important. We need to have that conversation, of course. Like, that's what pays the bills today. But we were talking like, what is life really going to look like as a patient? I'm a patient. Most of us are patients at some point. Like, when you show up to the doctor's office in 2031, like, what is that going to look like? What's the interaction going to look like with your doctor when everyone is using AI? And like, no one was really kind of answering that question. So in the summer of last year, the five of us started the Foundation for Artificial Intelligence and Health, which is a 501c6 foundation, to really catalyze conversations about this topic and try to get people to think from like a day after tomorrow, to use a Peter Hinson term, Like, what is the world going to look like in 5 to 7 years? And is it going to be something that we design, like that we want to happen? Or is it going to be something that just happens to us by default because no one has ever kind of like stood up to say, like, this is what we actually want it to look like? And I think what I really realized last year is, kind of to use a Steve Jobs quote, is that when you realize that the world around you is built by people like you, like it really does change your perspective. And I realized last summer that if we didn't start having that conversation, then it was going to be a world that was handed to us, not one of our own making. And that did scare me a little bit, that people were going to start just randomly kind of figuring things out without any real thought to it. And as a parent, as a patient, as a husband, I didn't really want a world to kind of just be given to me without any real consideration. So we started the foundation to try to kind of goad people or catalyze conversations around things that matter. Like, should, scientific and technical publishers encourage authors that are doing clinical research to use Gen AI to produce the manuscripts that they publish so that more people can have access to them faster? Because if you're, a person with cancer, don't you want that information as soon as possible so you can improve your health? And questions like that. So like, we've been doing that. We've been having those conversations for the last year plus, and there are, hundreds, thousands of questions like that are possible now to be asked and answered because of what generative AI makes possible.
Well, that's a fascinating example, because there is a bias, I think, right now, a human bias and a professional bias that says if it's, if this was produced using generative AI, then it's not valid. That's, there's this there's almost a bias that says, you can't, using generative AI is cheating. And it needs to be generated, it needs to be produced by humans all the way through, every last word, punctuation mark, and syllable. And it's that kind of colored thinking that will not make this work. You can't have that kind of whatever it is. I mean, it's just, it won't. You do need to kind of free your mind and say, no, these tools need to be employed. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. People have that like natural kind of like aversity, if you will, to, not wanting to kind of trust generative with things that matter, whether it's, seeing a doctor or getting information from a scientific resource and the rest. But, that being said, there are a number of solutions that already exist using generative where there is no concern for hallucination, where it is literally zero. And what you get back is entirely factual and accurate. I think what's really there, though, is this like human factor, this human concern of what essentially is a trust concern. What people want really is to trust that what they're seeing is reliable, it's credible, it's accurate, it's valid, it's reliable, those types of things. And I think if you can serve that up to them in a way that they believe has at least the same level of trust as what they get from a person, then I'd like to believe that would be equivalent, if not the same as what they get currently. But right now, it's not happening. People aren't saying, okay, well, I can give you the same thing, this deliverable, this content in a trustworthy fashion that you're getting from the current sources. And if you saw that, would you take that as equivalent? And by the way, it'll come 10 times faster and you'll be able to make decisions 5 times faster. Is that of interest to you? So those types of conversations we're trying to encourage so that people can really kind of push the boundaries of what's possible so that we wake up to a world 6 years from now that is better than the one which we woke up to today.
Yeah, and again, I harken back to the internet revolution that I remember very specifically. And I remember being one of the people who said out loud to others, I will never, ever use a credit card to buy something through the internet. And any email I get that has any commercial offerings, I will consider spam and, will opt out and refuse. And, all the things that we all believed back in the day that, that this wasn't secure. It wasn't going, I was going to lose all my banking information, and this internet thing was, limited to being able to present me with basic brochureware. And that was about all it was going to have value for. Again, very limited. And then here we are, not that many years later, and it's effectively destroyed brick and mortar over and over and over again.
That's a great analogy. And I think also, just like the internet is like a thing, like, it's a tool that you can use, like, say, on Google to search something up. It also is itself a catalyst. Like, by using the internet, everything else is faster. Like, it connects people. It like makes the spread of information much faster than it was before. And because the internet exists now, research is faster, decisions are faster, life is faster because of the internet. You're going to see the same type of thing with generative artificial intelligence, but you're going to see it in 5 years instead of 25. So by 2031, the world will be a lot smaller than it is right now because of generative. And yes, there are tools that use generative, like ChatGPT and Gemini and the rest, but the entire world will be on hyperdrive within the next 5 years because of generative AI. And like it was with the internet, all of a sudden, things that people took for granted, like, I would never use AI to do X. Like, you may not even say the words AI. Like, everything will be AI powered. So in 5 years, like, this will be like a silly conversation to even have, because everyone will be using generative AI for a lot more things than they use it for now. And it'll make hopefully a lot of things that we wouldn't even consider possible our daily reality for people, that hopefully improve their actual, like, living lives. And that's what we want.
Well, so I want to talk about what I would consider, at least over the last 20 years, some of the downside of the internet and being online is that the world, for many people, has become a lonelier place for a number of reasons. It's also been perhaps a little bit darker for folks as well. And I want to talk about, the implications with regard to mental health as we currently are seeing it, because I would argue that, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that there are a lot of people who are far worse off now mentally than they were 25 years ago, before the internet and social media in particular was as ubiquitous. And I don't think we truly understood, because again, the market decides in the end what we will all consume, or what we will all be forced to consume. And a lot of the innovations around social media and the dopamine shots that it is enabling has created a lot of downside for people, I would argue. And I'm curious what you think about that in particular, but what you think the ramifications are with regard to the AI revolution coming along with that in place.
I'm definitely not like a Pollyanna kind of like, all positive on AI or anything. No one can be, I think, on any technology. I think technology by itself is inert, right? I mean, like, whether even with fire, right? I mean, you could use fire to, warm yourself up, or to provide light in the caves, back to our ancestral days. But you could also, make a torch and go burn someone's house down. So, it's not by itself a positive or a negative. It's how you use it. And, generally speaking, like, social media over the last 15, 20 years has had no guardrails. Like, and it's been really controlled by corporate interests and, by bad actors using it for their own purposes. And it is extremely effective for those means. It actually is pretty interesting kind of how it's been used without any guardrails. That it isn't even worse than it is today, considering the fact that there wasn't any real regulation for a long time. That things that they're not even worse than they are, but it's amazing kind of that we aren't further down the path and that we've gotten. I think part of what is likely to happen, I think, with generative artificial intelligence is that as people kind of find ways to democratize content and get better content faster, which is what's going to happen. Situations like this, where we're talking, through electronic means and the rest, will become more frequent for people, but they'll also potentially have a lower value. So, the people will spend more of their time online in digital ways. But I think as a result, in-person settings and in-person experiences will elevate their importance for a lot of people. And I think as we think about what that means, we have to really be thoughtful about how to encourage people to spend time with those that they care about and that care for them, and really encourage social connection as a primary means of mental health for many people, not just in this country where there is a loneliness epidemic, but across the world. And I think people kind of feel like, oh, I just talked to someone on LinkedIn or on Instagram, so I've connected with them. But it doesn't really work that way. It's not a stand-in for social connection. You really need to see someone in person, preferably like on a hike or at a park or at a third place, like a coffee shop or the gym or something like that, to really count as connection. And we haven't spent enough time really thinking about social connection in person, in public, in ways that are supported as a kind of antidote to what happens online. And it's going to get worse as the digital kind of connection kind of explodes over the next couple of years. Protecting our mental health through social connection is going to become even more important. And again, I think it requires someone to really take responsibility for that. It's not going to happen on its own. It requires some leadership.
Yeah, I have this belief that our primitive, I don't know if it's the limbic system, whatever our primitive brain that has developed over years and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, in being able to recognize this is a human conversation, even though we are not face to face and in person. But we recognize, because we understand each other to be human, that this is a human conversation and a human interaction. But with the advent of artificial intelligence created avatars that are going to be imperceptible to this conversation and will have the generative AI capacity to engage in an adequately meaningful conversation, that our primitive, we will not be able to tell the difference, or at least our internal whatever limbic system won't be able to tell the difference between me being an avatar and you being a human, to the point actually where I think we'll be able to get meaningful, and I think there was a movie about this, meaningful and beneficial interactions from completely artificial substitutes.
Yeah. This is a really fascinating area of both research and technology at present. It's one of the areas that I'm really quite interested in, actually. The furthest along, I would say, in this vein is in the area of what might be called death tech. And it exists primarily, not so much in this country, but primarily in the Far East, where a number of the firms, mostly using Baidu's model and Alibaba's model, the rest are building a number of generative AI kind of companions for people that have recently deceased relatives. And, so you're thinking of people that they're grieving over the loss of their mother, for example, or something similar. And they've stood up an avatar of this recently deceased relative, and they continue to commune with this person who is not alive any longer in perpetuity past that person's departure. And they have a meaningful relationship with this person as if they're still there. I read an article recently with one of these people. They talked to their mother, and the person that's standing in for their mother, the avatar, does the same like nagging things that the mother actually did when the mother was around. And it gives this person, that is like a young executive at a Chinese firm, like a degree of comfort that his mother is still there, kind of helping him along. And it's a bit surreal, but I can totally understand and get it. And I imagine there's going to come a time when the kind of weirdness, like it factor, goes away, and people just accept that as like a normal part of life. And if that becomes normal, then a lot of other things that right now are anomalous stop being so, and we start kind of embracing AI as colleague, AI as companion, AI as thought partner into our actual life. But we're not there yet, but I can see it on the horizon.
I don't think there's any question that will become a part of your aging process as a human, is that you will go out of your way to subscribe to some service that captures you so completely in a digital avatar that you can live into perpetuity, and you'll be able to tune it, or it will ask you enough questions to tune itself to present you going forward. I don't think there's any question, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it's going to get confusing.
I mean, I like a lot of people that are in this field. Like, I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy when I was a child, and I still read a bit today. I read this book like the beginning of our pandemic that I couldn't read in full because I started reading it before our pandemic, and then when the pandemic happened, I couldn't read it because it was about a pandemic, and I couldn't read about a pandemic in fiction while our pandemic was happening. There's a great book. It's called How High We Go in the Dark, and it takes place like maybe 60 years from now. And in this book, they envisage a world where people have essentially like built their AI models into robot animals, like robot companion pets, essentially. And so in this one country, they have like the voice of deceased relatives in these like robot pets. And because of the pandemic, like the robot pet repair people are all out of work. They can't fix the pets anymore. So people have these like pets that are not fixable. And but it's so important that this is like the only way they can connect with their deceased relatives. And the people that are fixing the pets are like so in high demand because everyone wants to be able to still connect with their deceased relatives. It's an very interesting like consideration of what the future world might be like, you know, in terms of emotional connection and all the rest.
Well, so there are so many implications, and having a very elderly father who, my mother passed a decade prior, and he lived effectively alone for many years. There is something to be said for solutions like that to help people who, for any number of life reasons, are alone and would just welcome a spontaneous interaction of any type, rather than just watching television or surfing the internet or whatever it is.
Sure.
So I'm fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated, however, there's just so many implications here, but I think there's going to be some significant, speaking of mental health ramifications, some significant impact on, as AI begins to be implemented by large organizations, and capitalism is undefeated, it will inevitably result in cost savings because that's what corporations do in the capitalist society. And so it will impact information workers first and foremost, rather than, I would argue, blue collar workers. And when those information workers begin to realize, as they're in the middle of their career, that they are just not competitive with what artificial intelligence can do, and when the C-suite recognizes, which they probably already do, that artificial intelligence agents never need benefits, never call in sick, never look for another job, never leave, work weekends 24 hours a day, it will be mentally devastating for a very intelligent information worker to realize that regardless of all their years of training and all their expertise and all their human capacity, they aren't competitive with agents, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Again, I think that is like kind of a natural process that people have to go through. Like that's like almost like the the Kubler like stages of grief thing. Like people start in that place where like, oh shit, like I'm out of a job. Like the robots are going to take my job. That's like the first stage. But you have to get past that to like, like this is like not what I thought I was going to be doing with my time, my life. But how do I make this work for me? And then you have to get into that point of like, okay, well, if I'm still here and I have 10, 15 years of work left ahead of me, how can I like use this that actually helps me as opposed to be like a threat? And then after that, some people are like, okay, well, I want to make this my whole life is doing AI. I know a lot of people like that have become experts in like a very short amount of time. And other people are like, oh, this isn't going to be my thing, but I need to like live with it. I don't know many people that are still like scared of it. Like most people are like, I thought this is going to take my job, but now that I've done it for 3-6 months, I realize that's not really the case. It's more like it's going to take like this 10% of my job that I hated anyway. And now the other 90% I can do most of the time. And but the thing is, the really funny thing is that like sometimes like it really actually does do a lot of great things. And like the organization can't like accommodate that much change, right? You like Copilot is a great example of this, like Microsoft Copilot. There are certain things within Copilot that are remarkable, like what it can do for, say, PowerPoint or for Outlook is like the same amount of work in 1/100th amount of time. But when you show that to certain people that have done this their whole life, you're like, wait a second, like this used to take me 20 hours. Now I can do it in 41 minutes. What am I going to do with the other 19 hours and 19 minutes? Like, I don't know what to do with this. And they just like resist it tremendously. Like, even though it should actually help them a lot, they don't accept it at all. So it just goes back to that earlier discussion, which is even if it does work on paper, if the people in the business don't accept it, it doesn't have any effect at all because it's not autonomous. The AI isn't like an actual, kind of entity, like a robot walking along saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's not, it doesn't have any agency. It's just, it's a software program. So the people say, I don't really think we're going to use it now, or we should prioritize something else, or they just don't actually support its adoption. It doesn't get used, even if it is remarkable. So you really have to bring the people along for the ride. Otherwise, nothing really gets done.
Yeah, my take on this is a bit different in that, again, I think we haven't seen the products arrive yet. We're at the Netscape Navigator phase of the revolution, where the browser has hit. People get it now. They see what's happening and they are excited, but it's a novelty. I liken it to a tsunami, where the water has pulled out of the lagoon and everybody is down at the seashore picking up shells, and they don't realize what's coming yet. But what they should be doing is heading for the hills, because what's coming is not good. And that's going to be coming from above, from the C-suite. The salespeople will be arriving with tools that will very specifically say you can eliminate 80% of your marketing department and not skip a beat. And that 20% left will get the benefit of that massive efficiency. And those people who can do 40 hours of work in 20 minutes, yep, that's why you don't need 80% of them anymore. So this tool, if you just implement it and give us an annual subscription, and again, capitalism won't be able to resist. And the innovators of the technology, their shareholders will not allow them to not continue to build tools and innovate that are going to be remarkably compelling to sell.
Yeah.
To buy. Yeah. And I just don't see it ending well for the information worker. I just don't.
Yeah, I'm not going to, this isn't going to be like a protracted defense of the information worker, if you will, because I think generally speaking, a lot of these companies have, people that are doing, what has been separately referred to as like bullshit work, honestly.
Yeah.
Some people are doing.
I think there have been massive layoffs over the past 2 years recognizing that.
I mean, some people are doing great work in great companies helping people with real problems, but not everyone can claim the same, within their actual job. Some people can, but not everyone can. So, some people might be kind of finding new ways to find value. But, I think generally speaking, when that tsunami comes back over, like some people should be like grabbing a surfboard. Some people should be grabbing the biggest net possible, because when the tsunami hits the shore, it's going to throw things up against the shore that they couldn't have caught before, that now they actually can catch. But you're right, some people probably should be running for the hills, because no matter what hits, they're not going to be ready for it. But, it's knowing kind of where they need to play that's going to be helpful, I think, in the days to come, because it is coming, and it already is kind of hitting up against the shore, so to speak, in some environments. It's just a matter of kind of how urgent it is, depending upon, what's at stake.
So what do you provide for advice for those folks? I mean, so you've got, you've provided some advice for the C-level. I know you're thinking at a much higher level, but I'm curious, if you were to give some advice to I have 2 other kids who are up and out and currently in their 20s, beginning their careers. I mean, what kind of advice would you provide for folks who are just getting, are going to be in this tsunami for the next 25 years? What would you say they should be thinking about and not necessarily, taking up a completely analog.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the coolest things, honestly, about being in this role is that I got to meet a lot of people that I've admired for a long time, by being in this position, because being in this role, people ask me for my thoughts on stuff. And then I get to join like conferences and podcasts like yours and other, settings where I meet people that I've admired for a long time. And one of the people I've admired for a long time is a professor, Tom Davenport at Harvard, who wrote a book a number of years ago that I read many, many years ago, thinking, this is really interesting. I wonder if the world's going to look like this. And the book that he wrote is called Only Humans Need Apply. And it was written probably like 9-10 years ago about the world that we're actually in today, but it was way ahead of its time. And it suggests that there are only really like 3 or 4 ways to work when the AI kind of robot revolution is upon us. And he says it a lot better than I ever can, but he pretty much suggests that if you're not going to kind of run with the machines, his terminology, which is my preferred path, which is being like augmented by intelligence and being a better human and you can be alone, that's the preferred path. Then you only have a couple other options to you. It's not like the options that existed pre-AI are not necessarily the ones that remain, but he provides a couple of other paths. One of them is running away from the machines, which is essentially like, my oldest daughter is exceptionally talented from a vocal performance standpoint, and she wants to be on Broadway. So, she has nothing to do with AI. She hates AI. She doesn't like anything that I do at all, but that's cool. She's her own person.
Yeah.
But one way to be really strong and resident in the future that we're embracing, the future that's coming, is to be really strong in places where humans will congregate in live performances like Broadway theater, music, arts, sports, et cetera, because as people grow tired of online interactions, they'll need to seek out human interaction. So if you're not going to be all in with AI, then being all out with humans is going to be a good thing to focus on. Another thing that, to your point, AI will soon democratize all knowledge work, but kind of skillful work that requires hands, if you will, fine-tuned activities like electricians, plumbers, all the rest is going to be in huge demand in the next 3 to 7 years. And if you don't really care for AI, but also don't want to perform in front of a crowd, any technical work that is hands-oriented manual work is going to be increased both in wage as well as in demand in the near future, because it is not a high target for automation in the near future. It will be in the 2030s, but not in the late 2020s.
I think it's one of the great ironies of this revolution that the folks that the information worker, the folks that the information workers call at 11 o'clock at night on a weekend to get the boiler fixed, thinking, I wouldn't want that job, who show up and get the job done, who fix the transmission that's broken. Those are the people that are going to survive, and the people that
they'll survive for the next generation. But I think by the time those kids that are in high school now or our age in the early 2040s, those jobs will be automated as well. Because I know startups, I'm familiar with a couple of CEOs that are already starting to solve for some of those challenges, but the tech is so poor, it's so weak right now, because the detail that's required to do some of those jobs autonomously is so difficult that what they're building now won't really be relevant for 10, 12 years. So, you kind of think about how long it's going to take for you're going to have a robot plumber or like an AI model that can do like HVAC in the summer. It's going to be 12, 15, 18 years from now.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's way harder. I often, when I have my rants about the implications on information workers, people point to, self-driving cars. We've been working on self-driving cars for forever, and we haven't sorted all that out. And AI is not gonna, take everything off. And I keep thinking, it's one of the hardest things on the planet to possibly. You're talking about life and death and moving, 3,000 pounds of steel through metropolitan areas where human life forms exist. It's like, self-driving cars should take long, but the idea of automating the marketing department is I think relatively simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I know we're probably close to time, but I think the self-driving cars kind of example is really a good one, actually, in terms of what works within AI and what works within the world of humans, because self-driving cars do already work quite well, and they actually already are amazingly effective at doing what they intend to solve for. The thing that doesn't work with an AI self-driving cars is that regular people expect way too much of self-driving cars that they don't expect of other people. That is, they expect self-driving cars to have a standard of safety that they don't expect of their neighbor, their friend, their brother, their sister, people that are driving on the streets that we actually inhabit. They expect self-driving cars to be perfect, and no people are perfect. I've been in multiple car accidents in my life, and I never was hit by a self-driving car or a robot. I've only ever been hit by people. It's a really stupid, unfair, inaccurate baseline to measure against, and it makes the companies that produce self-driving cars held to a standard that is inaccurate and unreliable. Most new companies for self-driving cars are only looking at these kind of personalized vehicle routes that are like directed, say, from an airport to a high area of traffic like San Francisco, for example, are not on the main highway, because in those environments, there is no base traffic to consider, and you don't have to worry about what the average population considers to be safe. So you'll see self-driving cars mature a lot faster now, and you take the kind of what people think to be safe out of the equation and what you actually consider to be a real problem to be solved.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable time, and I couldn't be happier to be in the middle of it, talking to folks like you. I just think this is a fascinating subject, and I can't wait to see how it all starts to pan out as we go forward. Matt, this was a tremendous opportunity to have a chat with you, and I'd love to have another one not too far in the distance, not too far in the future.
That'd be great. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on, and for everyone that's listening in and watching. Much appreciated.
Yeah, great. Best of luck for the rest of the year, and for all the things that you're working on, and we'll keep track of you, and look forward to talking soon.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today.